The harsh crack of a leather whip split the cool morning air as Sarah Kaine clutched her newborn daughter to her chest, her husband's rage radiating through their modest homestead. A girl, another useless girl. Harrison Kaine bellowed, his weathered face contorted with disgust as he paced the dirt floor of their cabin outside Laramie, Wyoming Territory, 1876. I needed a son to work this land, not another mouth to feed who'll just marry off. Sarah's tears fell silently onto the infant's swaddling cloth, her heart breaking not for herself, but for the innocent child who'd done nothing wrong except be born female. Her eldest daughter, Emma, only 4 years old, cowered behind a wooden chair, having already learned to make herself invisible during her father's outbursts. "You have 1 week to pack your things," Harrison snarled, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. "Take your daughters and go back to your sister's place in Colorado. I'm finding myself a proper wife who can give me sons." As the door slammed behind him, Sarah collapsed onto the edge of their bed, her body still weak from childbirth 3 days prior. This land was supposed to be their fresh start, their piece of the American dream, 40 acres of possibility in the Wyoming Territory. Now it was just another broken promise. "Mama," Emma's small voice quavered as she crept from her hiding place, "are we leaving?" Sarah pulled her firstborn close with one arm, the newborn nestled in the other. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going on a journey." She wouldn't tell Emma they'd been cast out, that her father had deemed them worthless. Some truths were too heavy for a child's heart. The week passed in a blur of preparation and grief. Harrison barely returned to the cabin, spending his days working the land and his evenings at the saloon in town. When he did come home, he acted as if Sarah and the children were already gone, sleeping in the barn rather than share a roof with his disappointment. On the morning of their departure, Sarah stood by the rickety wagon she'd loaded with their meager possessions, waiting for the stagecoach that would take them to the nearest train station. Emma clutched her rag doll while the newborn, whom Sarah had named Lily despite Harrison's refusal to acknowledge her existence, slept against her chest in a sling. "The stage won't be here for another hour," a deep voice remarked from behind her. Sarah turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. As he stepped closer, she recognized Jack Keller, the owner of the neighboring ranch. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church socials and in town, but little more than that. He was known as a fair man who minded his own business, a rare and valuable trait in these parts. "Mr. Keller," she acknowledged with a polite nod, though she was in no mood for conversation. Jack removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Mrs. Kaine, if you don't mind my asking, where are you headed with these little ones?" Sarah hesitated, embarrassment burning her cheeks. "To my sister's place in Colorado." She didn't elaborate, but something in her expression must have revealed more than her words. Jack's gaze traveled to the sleeping infant, then to Emma, who was arranging pebbles in the dirt, and finally back to Sarah's face. "Harrison's sending you away because you had another daughter," he stated rather than asked, his voice low but tinged with an anger that wasn't directed at her. Sarah's silence was confirmation enough. Jack placed his hat back on his head, adjusting the brim with a deliberate motion that seemed to coincide with a decision being made. "My mother raised me to believe that children, boys or girls, are blessings from above. A man who can't see that doesn't deserve to be called a father." He paused, then continued with careful words. "Mrs. Kaine, my ranch has a second cabin that's standing empty since my foreman moved to California. It's not much, but it's solid built with a good roof and a working stove." Sarah blinked in confusion. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Keller?" "I'm suggesting that you don't need to leave Wyoming if you don't want to. That cabin is yours if you'll have it. I could use help with the bookkeeping and correspondence. I heard in town you used to be a schoolteacher before you married. I'd pay fair wages." His eyes conveyed sincerity as he added, "A woman and her children shouldn't be cast aside like unwanted livestock." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest, but caution quickly smothered it. Your husband made his choice," Jack interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. Now you get to make yours. You can leave on that stage or, he gestured toward the distant hills where his property lay, you can make a home where you and your daughters are wanted. Sarah's mind raced. Her sister's home in Colorado was already crowded with 6 children of her own. She'd be a burden there, dependent on her brother-in-law's charity. But accepting help from Jack Keller, a man she barely knew, that seemed equally precarious. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked, needing to understand his motivation. Jack's expression softened. "Because 20 years ago, my mother was in your position. My father threw her out when she had my little sister instead of another son. A neighbor gave us shelter, gave her work. That neighbor changed our lives." He looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "I'm just paying forward a kindness that was once shown to me." As if sensing her mother's turmoil, Lily began to fuss. Sarah gently rocked her while considering Jack's offer. It would mean staying close to Harrison, but it would also mean independence, a chance to stand on her own 2 feet rather than becoming a dependent relation. "The stage ticket was expensive," she said softly. "If I don't use it." "Then you'll have money for other necessities," Jack finished for her. "Mrs. Kaine, I'm not asking for anything in return except honest work. That cabin has sat empty for months and my account books are in a state that would make any banker weep. You'd be doing me a favor." Emma tugged at Sarah's skirt. "Mama, I don't want to go on the big noisy train," she whispered, her eyes wide with apprehension. That decided it. Sarah took a deep breath and extended her hand. "Mr. Keller, we accept your offer and we thank you for your kindness." Jack's smile was warm as he shook her hand. "Then let me help you load your things into my wagon. The stage won't miss you, but your daughters need their mother to build them a future right here." They arrived at Jack's ranch just as the midday sun reached its peak. The property was larger than Sarah had imagined, a sprawling expanse of good grazing land, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide front porch. A large barn stood nearby, along with several corrals and outbuildings. The promised cabin sat about a 1/4 mile from the main house, close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. As Jack pulled the wagon to a stop in front, Sarah felt a surge of relief. It was indeed solidly built, with glass windows and a stone chimney. It wasn't the tiny 1-room shelter she'd feared, but a respectable dwelling with what appeared to be at least 2 rooms. "It's not fancy," Jack said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's clean and sound. My foreman's wife was particular about keeping a nice home." Inside, Sarah found a main room with a cooking area and small sitting space, plus 2 bedrooms, a luxury she hadn't expected. The furniture was simple but functional. A table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, beds in both rooms, and basic cooking implements. "This is more than generous," Sarah said, emotion thickening her voice as Emma excitedly explored their new home. Jack shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Like I said, it was just sitting empty. I'll have my men bring water and firewood. The pantry has some basic supplies to get you started." He hesitated before adding, "Mrs. Kaine, I should mention there's a creek that runs behind the property. It's good water, but keep Emma away from it unless you're with her. The current can be strong after rain." Sarah appreciated his concern. "Please call me Sarah, and thank you for the warning. I'll be vigilant." Jack nodded. "Sarah, then, and I'm Jack to everyone except the tax collector." His attempt at humor brought a small smile to her face. "I'll leave you to get settled. Come up to the main house tomorrow morning and I'll show you the books I mentioned." After he left, Sarah sat in the rocking chair with Lily at her breast and watched Emma arrange her few toys in a corner of the main room. The enormity of what had happened, being cast out by her husband, accepting the help of a relative stranger, crashed over her like a wave. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a seed of something else had taken root: determination. Harrison had discarded them for the crime of being female. Well, she would show him and herself what a woman and her daughters were truly worth. Jack Keller was a man of his word. The ranch hands arrived within the hour, bringing water, firewood, and additional supplies, including a basket of fresh eggs, butter, and a loaf of bread from the ranch cook. By nightfall, Sarah had created a semblance of home in the cabin, with their clothes unpacked and beds made up with clean linens that had been stored in a cedar chest. The following morning, after settling Emma with her doll and making sure Lily was fed and sleeping, Sarah made her way to the main house. She dressed in her best remaining dress, a simple blue calico that had seen better days but was neat and clean. Her dark blonde hair was pinned severely back, emphasizing her determination to be seen as a capable employee rather than a charity case. The housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, answered her knock, a round-faced woman with iron gray hair and kind eyes. "You must be Mrs. Kaine," she said, ushering Sarah inside. "The boss is in his study. I'll show you the way after I get you some coffee." The interior of the main house reflected its owner, solid, unpretentious, but of good quality. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath simple braided rugs, and the furniture looked comfortable rather than showy. A few landscape paintings adorned the walls, alongside mounted antlers and a gun rack that held several rifles. Mrs. Abernathy led Sarah to a room at the back of the house. "Mr. Keller, Mrs. Kaine is here," she announced, then whispered to Sarah, "Holler if you need anything, dear," before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Jack stood from behind a desk that was indeed buried under a chaotic array of papers, ledgers, and correspondence. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I hope you and the girls settled in all right." "We did, thank you. The cabin is very comfortable." Sarah clasped her hands in front of her, wanting to appear professional. "I'm ready to begin work whenever you'd like." Jack gestured to the disaster zone that was his desk. "As you can see, organization isn't my strong suit. I've been trying to keep up with everything since my former foreman left, but between the ranch operations and the paperwork, something had to give." Sarah approached the desk, already mentally sorting the chaos into categories. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the nearest ledger. "Please, I'm at your mercy," Jack replied with a self-deprecating smile. For the next 2 hours, Sarah cataloged the extent of the disorganization while Jack explained the ranch operations. The K-Bar Ranch, as it was known, ran several hundred head of cattle and employed 8 full-time hands, plus seasonal workers during roundup and branding. Jack had inherited it from his father 6 years earlier and had worked to expand both the herd and the grazing lands. "You've been quite successful," Sarah observed, examining the profit margins from the previous year's cattle sales. Jack leaned against the edge of the desk. "I've been lucky. Good weather, good men working for me, and cattle prices holding steady. But I could do better with proper records and timely correspondence. I've missed opportunities because papers got buried in this mess." Sarah closed the ledger she'd been reviewing. "I can fix this," she said confidently. "I'll need a few days to organize everything, then we can establish a system to keep it that way. I can handle correspondence in the mornings and bookkeeping in the afternoons." Jack nodded, looking relieved. "That sounds perfect." And speaking of payment, he named a monthly sum that made Sarah's eyes widen. It was considerably more than she'd expected. "That's too generous," she protested. "It's the going rate for a skilled bookkeeper, which is what you are," Jack countered. "I don't offer charity disguised as wages, Sarah." "You'll earn every penny." His straightforwardness was refreshing after Harrison's manipulations. Her husband had always made her feel that every penny spent on her or the children was a begrudged favor rather than her due as his wife and the mother of his children. "Very well," she agreed. "I accept your terms." "Good." Jack pushed away from the desk. "Now, how about some lunch before you head back to check on your girls? Mrs. Abernathy always makes enough to feed an army." Their meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Mrs. Abernathy joined them, filling Sarah in on the ranch gossip and personalities with good-natured humor. By the time Sarah headed back to the cabin with a basket of leftover food for dinner, she felt more hopeful than she had in months. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, Sarah would attend to Lily's needs, prepare breakfast for Emma, and then walk to the main house where she would spend several hours organizing Jack's business affairs. She'd return to the cabin for lunch and to check on the girls, who were being watched by a young woman from town whom Jack had arranged to help. Sarah discovered that she enjoyed the work, which exercised her mind in ways that household chores never had. Jack was an appreciative employer, expressing genuine gratitude for her efforts and often seeking her opinion on business matters. Their professional relationship gradually warmed into a friendship built on mutual respect. As for the girls, Emma blossomed in their new environment. Free from her father's constant disapproval, she became more talkative and adventurous. Jack would sometimes find little presents on his desk, a pretty rock, a wildflower, or a childish drawing left by small hands during Emma's visits. He always made a point of thanking her solemnly for these treasures, treating each one as if it were precious. Lily grew too, a healthy, contented baby who rarely fussed. Jack seemed almost in awe of her, watching with fascination whenever Sarah brought her to the main house. "Would you like to hold her?" Sarah offered one afternoon, noticing his interest. Jack looked startled. "I wouldn't know how, she's so small." "Nonsense, you won't break her." Sarah placed Lily in his large, calloused hands, showing him how to support her head. The transformation in Jack's face as he cradled the infant was remarkable. Wonder, tenderness, and something like longing passed over his features. "Hello there, little lady," he whispered. "Aren't you something special?" In that moment, watching this strong man melting at the smile of a baby girl who'd been rejected by her own father, something shifted in Sarah's heart. This wasn't just gratitude she was feeling. It was something warmer, something that made her cheeks flush when Jack looked up and caught her watching him. 6 weeks after their arrival at the K-Bar Ranch, the past caught up with them. Sarah was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. Shading her eyes against the late morning sun, she felt her stomach drop as she recognized the rider. Harrison Kaine looked as though he'd been on a bender for days, unshaven, clothes rumpled, eyes bloodshot. He dismounted unsteadily and approached, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. "So this is where you've been hiding," he slurred, gesturing broadly at the cabin. "Shacking up with Keller while I've been half out of my mind wondering if you and the girls were even alive." Sarah straightened her spine. "You told me to leave, Harrison. You gave me a week to pack and go. I went. To your sisters. You were supposed to go to your sisters." He shouted, causing Emma to run inside in fear. "Instead, I hear from Thompson at the general store that my wife and daughters are living on Jack Keller's property." His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "People are talking, Sarah, saying my wife left me for another man." "That's not true, and you know it," Sarah retorted, keeping her voice low but firm. "You threw us out because Lily was a girl. Mr. Keller offered me employment and housing for my children when you abandoned your responsibilities as a husband and father." Harrison advanced toward her, fists clenched. "You're my wife, the girls are my daughters, I'm taking you home." "No," the word came out stronger than Sarah had intended, surprising them both. "No, Harrison, we're not going back. You made your choice when you decided daughters weren't worth keeping." His face contorted with rage. "You don't get to tell me no, woman. I own you. I own those girls." "You own nothing here, Kaine," came Jack's voice from behind them. He stood at the edge of the yard, rifle in hand though pointed at the ground. "Mrs. Kaine and her daughters are under my protection as employees of this ranch. You're trespassing." Harrison spun to face him, nearly losing his balance. "Your protection. Is that what they're calling it these days when a man takes another man's wife?" "I employed a woman with valuable skills who needed work," Jack replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less. Now I suggest you get back on that horse and ride away before you say something you'll regret when you're sober." "She's my wife," Harrison roared, lurching toward Jack. Jack didn't raise the rifle, but his stance shifted subtly. "The law in Wyoming Territory is clear. A man who abandons his family loses his claim to them. You told her to leave your property and take the children. Witnesses in town heard you declare it publicly at Miller's saloon. You have no legal standing here." Sarah hadn't known this, and from Harrison's thunderstruck expression, neither had he. Jack continued, his voice like steel. "Now you have a choice. You can leave peacefully, or I can have my men escort you to the property line in a manner you won't enjoy." As if on cue, two ranch hands appeared, leading their horses at a walk. They stopped a respectful distance away, but their presence was a clear statement of support for their boss. Harrison's gaze darted between Jack, the ranch hands, and Sarah. The alcohol in his system didn't entirely mask the calculation taking place behind his eyes. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Keep them, then. The girl's worthless anyway, and that baby—" He stopped as Jack took a single step forward, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. Harrison backed up, hands raised. "I'm going, but this isn't over, Keller. A man doesn't steal another man's family without consequences." He mounted his horse clumsily and wheeled it around, spurring it harder than necessary as he galloped away. The tension left Sarah's body all at once, leaving her shaking. Jack was at her side in an instant, his rifle handed off to one of the men. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. Sarah nodded, trying to compose herself. "I should check on Emma. She was frightened." "Of course." Jack hesitated, then added, "Sarah, what I said about the law, it's true. He can't force you to return to him, not after a public abandonment. But I want you to know that if you ever did want to reconcile with him, I wouldn't stand in your way. Your life is your own to choose." Sarah looked up into Jack's concerned face. "Thank you, but I have no intention of ever returning to that man. He showed his true nature when he rejected his own child for the sin of being female." Jack's expression softened. "Then you and your daughters will always have a place here for as long as you want it." It wasn't until he'd gone that Sarah realized something significant. When Jack had confronted Harrison, he hadn't mentioned his own interest in her at all. His defense had been entirely about her rights and the children's welfare. There had been no possessive claim, no male posturing beyond what was necessary to protect them. Jack Keller truly was a different kind of man. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Sarah sat on the small porch of the cabin, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, a dazzling display that always left her in awe of the vastness of the Wyoming sky. She heard footsteps approaching and wasn't surprised when Jack emerged from the darkness, a lantern in hand. "I thought you might like some company," he said, setting the lantern on a small table. "If I'm intruding, just say the word." "You're not intruding," Sarah assured him, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "I was just thinking." Jack settled into the chair, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "Heavy thoughts from the look of you," Sarah smiled faintly, "just processing the day." Harrison's appearance stirred up a lot of memories, not many of them good. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jack offered. "Sometimes speaking things aloud takes away some of their power." Sarah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "When I married Harrison 6 years ago, he wasn't the man you met today. Or at least, I didn't see that man. He was charming, ambitious, full of dreams about our life together." She sighed. "But the land was harder than he expected. Crops failed the first year. Livestock died in a bad winter the second. And somewhere along the way, he started drinking and blaming me for our misfortunes." Jack listened silently, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern. When Emma was born, he was disappointed but tried to hide it. He'd convinced himself the next child would be a son. But after 4 years of waiting for that next child, his resentment grew. By the time I was carrying Lily, he barely spoke to me except to remind me that this baby had better be a boy. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "When she was born, he wouldn't even look at her. 3 days later, he told me to leave." "I'm sorry," Jack said softly. "No woman deserves such treatment, and no child deserves to be rejected for something they can't control." Sarah turned to look at him. "Earlier, you mentioned your mother was in a similar situation. Would you tell me about it?" Jack's expression grew distant, remembering. "My father was a hard man, successful in business but cold at home. He had 2 sons from his first wife who died in childbirth. When he married my mother, he expected her to produce more sons to inherit his businesses. I was the first, so that was acceptable. But when my sister Rebecca was born, he flew into a rage." He shifted in his chair, his voice taking on a painful edge. "He told my mother to get rid of the baby, to give her to an orphanage or a relative. Said he wouldn't have a useless female child taking up space in his house. My mother refused, so he threw us all out, me, my mother, and newborn Rebecca. That's terrible, Sarah whispered. Jack nodded. We had nowhere to go. My mother's family had disowned her for marrying my father in the first place. We were on the street with just the clothes on our backs when Martha Jenkins found us. She owned a dressmaking shop and needed help. She gave us the rooms above her shop and employment for my mother. Your neighbor, Sarah realized, recalling his earlier mention. Yes, she saved our lives, and she taught me that the measure of a person isn't in their gender or their bloodline, but in their character and their actions. Jack's eyes met Sarah's. That's why I couldn't stand by when I heard what Harrison had done. History doesn't need to keep repeating itself. Sarah reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his arm. Thank you for sharing that with me, and thank you for what you did today. Jack covered her hand with his own. Sarah, I want you to know something. I respect you enormously, your dignity, your strength, your devotion to your daughters. My offer of employment and housing comes with no strings attached, no expectations beyond the work we agreed upon. His voice was earnest, almost urgent, but I would be lying if I said I didn't feel something more than respect when I look at you. Sarah's heart quickened. Jack, please let me finish, he said gently. I'm not declaring anything or asking for anything. It's far too soon for that, and you've been through too much. I just want you to know that if someday you might consider seeing me as more than your employer and friend, that possibility would make me very happy. But if not, your place here is secure regardless. The honesty of his words moved her deeply. I don't know what the future holds, she said truthfully, but I do know that in these few weeks, you've shown me more kindness and respect than Harrison did in 6 years of marriage. That means something to me. Jack smiled, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. That's more than enough for now. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead, each lost in their own thoughts about possibilities that hadn't existed just hours before. The seasons turned. Summer faded into a glorious autumn, with the aspen trees around the ranch glowing gold against the evergreens. Sarah's position at the K-Bar Ranch evolved from temporary arrangement to permanent situation. Jack's business affairs had never been more organized, and with Sarah's careful management, the ranch's profits increased substantially. Harrison made no further appearances, though they heard through town gossip that he had taken up with a widow who had 2 teenage sons, apparently fulfilling his need for male heirs without the inconvenience of producing them himself. Sarah felt only relief at this news. As for her relationship with Jack, it developed slowly, naturally, like a seed taking root in fertile soil. They still maintained professional boundaries during work hours, but evenings often found them sharing meals or conversation on the cabin porch. Jack would read stories to Emma, who adored him, and he displayed an almost comical pride in every milestone Lily achieved. She smiled at me, he announced one day, bursting into the study where Sarah was working on correspondence. A real smile, Sarah, not just gas. Sarah laughed at his enthusiasm. She likes you, she has good taste. Their first kiss happened on a crisp October evening after Jack had helped Sarah repair a loose shutter on the cabin. The work done, they stood in the yard admiring the sunset painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, Jack murmured, but when Sarah turned, she found him looking not at the sunset but at her. Jack, she whispered, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. May I? He asked, his intention clear in his eyes. Sarah's answer was to rise on tiptoe, closing the distance between them. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, and Sarah felt something long dormant within her spring to life, a sense of rightness, of coming home. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that for months, he admitted. What took you so long? Sarah teased, feeling lighthearted in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. I was giving you time, and myself too, if I'm honest. His expression grew more serious. Sarah, I want to do this right. You and the girls deserve nothing less. From that day forward, their courtship proceeded with purpose, though still with patience. Jack was mindful of Sarah's position as a woman technically still married, though abandoned, and of the importance of maintaining her reputation in the eyes of the community. They were discreet but not secretive, allowing the ranch hands and townspeople to draw their own conclusions about the nature of their relationship. By Christmas, Jack was a daily presence at the cabin, joining them for meals and helping with chores. Emma called him Mr. Jack and followed him everywhere, while Lily, now 7 months old, would squeal with delight whenever he entered a room. On Christmas Eve, after the girls were nestled in bed dreaming of the presents that waited for morning, Jack and Sarah sat before the fireplace, a blanket draped over their laps and mugs of spiced cider warming their hands. "I have something for you," Jack said, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately, before tomorrow's celebrations." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. Sarah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a velvet box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Oh, Jack, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of Emma and one of Lily, expertly painted in miniature. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "How did you manage this?" "Remember when that traveling portrait artist came through town last month? I commissioned him to paint them from sketches I had made." Jack looked pleased at her reaction. "There's something else in the box." Sarah looked again and found a folded piece of paper tucked into the bottom of the velvet case. She opened it to find legal documents, and as she read, her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "These are divorce papers," she said, looking up at him in astonishment. "How?" "I hired a lawyer in Cheyenne," Jack explained. "Under territorial law, Harrison's public abandonment of you and the children constitutes grounds for divorce. The lawyer says it's straightforward, especially since Harrison has been openly living with another woman. You just need to sign and the court will process it. You'll be legally free within a month." Sarah stared at the papers, emotions warring within her. Freedom from Harrison was something she'd barely dared to hope for, assuming she would live in limbo indefinitely. "I've overstepped," Jack said, misinterpreting her silence. "I'm sorry, I should have discussed it with you first." "No," Sarah said quickly, reaching for his hand. "You haven't overstepped. This is the most incredible gift anyone has ever given me. I'm just overwhelmed." Jack's expression relaxed. "There's no pressure to sign right away. Take time to think." "I don't need time," Sarah interrupted, already reaching for the pen on the side table. "I know exactly what I want." She signed the papers with a steady hand, feeling as if she were signing away not just a failed marriage but all the fear and uncertainty that had shadowed her since Harrison's rejection. When she was done, she looked up at Jack with shining eyes. "Thank you for this chance at a new beginning." Jack took the papers and set them aside, then cupped her face in his hands. "Sarah, I have one more question to ask you, one that I've been waiting to ask until you were truly free to answer." Sarah's heart raced as he slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your kindness, your intelligence. I love the way you care for your daughters, the way you've made this ranch a better place with your presence. I love Emma's spirit and Lily's smile." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I want to spend my life with you, to raise your daughters as my own, to perhaps add more children to our family if that's what you desire." He took her hands in his. "Sarah Kaine, once your divorce is final, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me raise daughters beside you and show them every day what it means to be treasured?" Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as joy bloomed in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jack, nothing would make me happier." He rose to sit beside her again, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally drew apart, Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "When I was forced to leave my home with 2 small children and nowhere to go, I thought my life was ending," she reflected. "I couldn't see how we would survive, let alone find happiness again." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "And now?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her beautiful daughters sleeping peacefully in the next room and this good man who had opened his heart to them all. Now I understand that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of a much better story. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that matched the fresh start in Sarah's life. The divorce was finalized without incident. Harrison, occupied with his new household, didn't even appear at the brief court proceeding in Cheyenne. Sarah walked out of the courthouse feeling pounds lighter, the burden of her failed marriage finally lifted from her shoulders. Jack had proposed a June wedding, giving them time to plan a proper celebration, but Sarah had another idea. Why wait? She asked one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the cabin, watching Emma chase butterflies in the tall grass. The divorce is final, we know what we want. Why not marry now in the spring when everything is new and beginning? Jack's smile was answer enough. I'd marry you tomorrow if that's what you wanted. So it was that on a perfect April morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and cottonwood fluff drifting through the air like summer snow, Sarah stood before the minister in Laramie's small church. Emma, in a new blue dress, scattered flower petals down the aisle while Lily, now nearly a year old, was held by Mrs. Abernathy in the front pew. Jack waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Sarah as she walked toward him in a simple cream-colored dress, adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't an elaborate gown, there had been no time for that, but the joy radiating from her face outshone any finery. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the K-Bar Ranch was a community affair. Neighbors and townspeople who had watched their story unfold came to offer congratulations and share in their happiness. Even the ranch hands had cleaned up impressively for the occasion, though they maintained a respectful distance from the ladies, clustering near the beer barrels that Jack had brought in for the festivities. As the afternoon stretched into evening, with fiddle music filling the air and lanterns being lit around the yard, Jack found Sarah sitting on a bench watching Emma dance with one of the younger ranch hands who was teaching her to do see-do. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. The name still gave Sarah a little thrill. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. Jack's gaze drifted to where Lily was being passed around among the admiring wives of neighboring ranchers, each exclaiming over her sunny disposition and cherubic features. "She looks like you," he observed. "She'll be breaking hearts before we know it." "Heaven help us when that day comes," Sarah laughed. "Though I imagine you'll be standing on the porch with a shotgun, warning off potential suitors." "Damn right I will," Jack agreed with mock seriousness. "Any young man wanting to court my daughters will have to prove himself worthy." "My daughters?" The casual inclusion of both girls in that statement warmed Sarah's heart. Jack had already begun the legal process of adoption, wanting to give the girls his name and ensure they would be his heirs in every sense of the word. As if sensing they were talking about her, Lily let out a squeal from across the yard, straining toward them in the arms of her current holder. Jack immediately stood and went to retrieve her, returning with the baby balanced expertly in one arm. "I think she wants her mama," he said, but when he tried to hand Lily over, she clung to his shirt with surprising strength. "Or maybe her papa," Sarah suggested softly. Jack's expression at that simple word, papa, was one Sarah knew she would remember forever. Wonder, gratitude, and profound love transformed his features as he looked down at the little girl in his arms. "That's right, sweetheart," he murmured to Lily. "I'm your papa now, and I always will be." The years that followed were not without challenges. Life in the Wyoming Territory demanded resilience from all who chose to make it their home. There were harsh winters that threatened the herd, dry summers that tested the land's endurance, and the usual trials of raising children in a frontier environment. But through it all, Jack and Sarah faced each obstacle as partners, their bond strengthening with each passing season. Emma grew into a confident young girl with her mother's intelligence and her adoptive father's love of the land. Lily, never knowing any father but Jack, blossomed under his adoration, becoming a fearless tomboy who could ride almost as soon as she could walk. 2 years after their wedding, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Matthew and Rebecca, the latter after Jack's sister who had died of fever as a young woman. Jack's joy at the birth of his biological children was no greater than the love he had shown Emma and Lily from the beginning. In his eyes, all four were equally his children, equally precious. As the K-Bar Ranch prospered, so did the family that called it home. Jack built a larger cabin for their growing family, though Sarah insisted it remain on the same spot where they had begun their life together. The original cabin became a schoolhouse of sorts, where Sarah taught not only her own children, but those of the ranch hands and neighboring families who couldn't travel to town for formal education. Harrison Kaine eventually moved west to Oregon with his new wife and stepsons, disappearing from their lives completely. Emma retained dim memories of her birth father, but Lily knew only Jack as her papa, a fact that Harrison had never contested, having washed his hands of a daughter he had never wanted. On the 10th anniversary of the day Sarah and her daughters had arrived at the K-Bar Ranch, the family held a special celebration. The children, ranging now from 8-year-old twins to 15-year-old Emma, had planned a surprise picnic by the creek, setting up a table with a white cloth and wildflower centerpieces. "What's all this?" Sarah asked, allowing herself to be led blindfolded to the spot by Jack. "Just a little something to mark the occasion," he replied, removing the blindfold so she could see their children standing proudly behind the table laden with food. "Surprise, Mama," they chorused, their faces alight with excitement. 10 years ago today," Jack said, his arm around Sarah's waist, "a stagecoach was supposed to take away the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. Thank God it didn't." Sarah looked around at the family they had created: Emma, almost a woman now, responsible and kind; Lily, vibrant and fearless at 11. And the twins, both possessing their father's blue eyes and their mother's determined spirit. And Jack, still her rock, her partner, her love, the man who had seen value in her and her daughters when another had cast them aside. "I was thinking this morning about what you said to me that day," Sarah told him as they all settled around the table. "Do you remember? You said, 'Then let me raise daughters beside you.'" Jack nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Best offer I ever made, and the best gift I ever received," Sarah replied, reaching across to take his hand. "Not just a home or security, but the chance to raise our children in a place where they're valued for exactly who they are." As they shared their meal by the creek, with the mountains standing sentinel in the distance and the spring sun warming their faces, Sarah felt a completeness that once would have seemed impossible. From abandonment to abundance, from rejection to unconditional love, their journey had not always been easy, but every step had led them here, to this perfect moment with the family they had built together. And in the end, that was the true fortune of the K-Bar Ranch: not the cattle or the land or the business success, but the love that had transformed 4 discarded lives into something beautiful and enduring. A love that had started with 7 simple words spoken by a man brave enough to challenge the conventions of his time. "Then let me raise daughters beside you."